Prisons are designed by top engineers and
Oriental.
guarded by heavily armed professionals. Yet, somehow, criminals look at a multi-million-dollar concrete fortress and decide a piece of dental floss or a frozen hamburger is all they need to leave. Today, we are looking at 50 of the most absurd, insulting, and downright hilarious prison escapes that actually worked. 1. Prison food is notoriously awful, but for David Sweat and Richard Matt, a frozen hamburger was the ultimate exit strategy from a New York maximum security facility. Instead of eating the suspicious cafeteria meat, they waited for it to thaw out. A compromised prison employee had literally stuffed heavy-duty hacksaw blades and power drill bits deep inside the raw beef. The guards hand-delivered the frozen blocks. The inmates extracted the hardware, and they went right to work slicing through solid steel cell walls and steam pipes. They pulled off a multi-million-dollar prison break funded entirely by the dinner menu. I guess a high-iron diet really does work miracles for your mobility. 2. Gravity is usually a warden's best friend, but Ronnie Biggs completely outsmarted it. This infamous train robber scaled a 30-foot brick wall at Wandsworth Prison using a rope ladder tossed over by his buddies. Dropping 30 feet onto solid concrete is a fantastic way to shatter your legs and get dragged right back to your cell. So, his friends simply parked a massive moving truck directly against the wall, cut a giant hole in the roof, and stacked the inside with stolen mattresses. Biggs took a blind leap of faith, plummeted through the roof hole, and bounced comfortably to freedom. He spent the next few decades drinking cocktails in Brazil while British authorities lost their minds. 3. If you ever want to commit a felony in broad daylight, just carry a cleaning rag. Victor Lustig, the legendary con artist who once sold the Eiffel Tower, used this psychological trick to slip out of a Manhattan detention center. He crafted a long rope out of cheap prison bed sheets and dangled himself out the window. Knowing that pedestrians would immediately spot an escaping convict, he put on a bored face and pretended to be a professional window washer. He wiped the glass, shimmied down a few feet, cleaned another pane, and politely waved at the confused New Yorkers walking below. Nobody questions a guy who looks miserable doing manual labor. 4. Gymnastics and high treason make a truly fantastic combination.
The wire, we're out.
The prisoners at Stalag Luft 3 orchestrated the ultimate Trojan horse deception by building a heavy wooden vaulting horse out of random scrap wood. They convinced the guards they were just deeply passionate about physical fitness. Every single afternoon, they hauled this bulky box to the exact same spot in the recreation yard. While one incredibly fit prisoner vaulted over it to distract the heavily armed sentries, another guy was secretly stuffed inside the hollow belly, frantically digging a subterranean tunnel straight down into the dirt. They were literally excavating a highway to freedom while doing amateur acrobatics right in front of the enemy. 5. Yoga is great for your lower back, but apparently it is also highly effective for slipping out of maximum security. Choi Gap-bok was a South Korean yoga master who essentially turned his entire skeletal system into a liquid. Waiting until the night shift fell asleep, he aggressively coated his body with stolen massage oil and approached his heavy steel door. He proceeded to squeeze himself directly through the rectangular food slot, a gap roughly 6 inches tall. It is significantly smaller than a standard shoebox. It took him 30 agonizing seconds of intentionally dislocating his own joints to slide through the metal gap like a greasy octopus. The man folded himself in half and just float away. 6. You do not always need a dramatic shootout to beat the justice system. Sometimes, you just need to be incredibly boring. Frank Freshwaters walked away from an Ohio prison work farm in 1959 and simply evaporated. He completely skipped the whole fleeing the country routine. Instead, he quietly relocated to Florida, secured a painfully average job, religiously paid his taxes, and lived a totally mundane life under a fake name for 56 years. Law enforcement finally tracked him down when he was a 79-year-old grandfather chilling in a mobile home. He proved that the absolute best way to evade a nationwide manhunt is to become a deeply unremarkable citizen for over half a century. 7. Treating high-level legal security like a mild suggestion is exactly how Alfred Hines became a British folk hero.
Presented by the crowd.
During a highly tense hearing at the law courts, he politely requested a quick bathroom break.
Granted.
2 large officers escorted him to the restroom facilities. The absolute second they unclipped his handcuffs so he could use the toilet, Hines violently shoved both policemen directly into the stall and slammed a heavy padlock onto the outside latch. While two highly trained officers were screaming and aggressively kicking the inside of a bathroom door, Hines calmly fixed his collar, walked out the front doors, and melted into the London traffic. He defeated federal custody by putting the cops in timeout. 8. Pulling off a Hollywood twin switch is funny in movies, but it takes serious nerve in a miserable Indian lockup. Satyajit Singh was sitting in a grimy cell awaiting a major trial when his identical twin brother arrived for a routine visit. They politely asked the guards for a brief moment of privacy, frantically traded outfits, and the brother who just walked in off the street simply took a seat. Satyajit confidently walked straight out the front gate, completely unchallenged by the oblivious security staff. The flawless scheme hit a massive roadblock when the remaining brother suddenly realized he was now legally required to rot in a cage. That is a truly horrific level of sibling sacrifice. 9. Digging a tunnel with a plastic spoon is a rookie move. In 2011, the Taliban orchestrated a mass breakout at Sarposa prison that completely humiliated the local government. Outside sympathizers spent 5 grueling months secretly excavating a massive 1,000-foot tunnel leading directly into the facility. This was not some claustrophobic dirt tube. The builders installed full electrical wiring, overhead lighting, and an active air ventilation system. In a single night, over 470 high-risk inmates quietly marched out into the desert. They honestly constructed significantly better and more reliable infrastructure underground than the city had managed to build above ground. It was a highly organized subway commute for criminals. 10. Faking your own death requires a lot of paperwork, but Stephen J. Russell found a truly disgusting workaround. Desperate to flee a Texas maximum security facility, he began consuming dangerous amounts of stolen laxatives every single day. He dropped weight at an alarming rate until he looked genuinely horrific. Then, he used an ancient prison typewriter to meticulously forge medical documents, claiming he was dying of a terminal illness. The administration took one look at his skeletal frame and immediately granted him a special needs parole to die peacefully in a nursing home. The second his wheelchair crossed the property line, he stopped taking the pills, ate a few massive cheeseburgers, and mailed the warden a fake death certificate. The man literally pooped his way to complete freedom. 11. Ralph Bucky Phillips had a severe allergy to concrete walls and a brilliant eye for terrible architecture. While sitting in an Erie County jail, he looked up and realized the kitchen ceiling was constructed from sheet metal that looked suspiciously cheap. He managed to steal a heavy-duty manual can opener from the prep area, the exact kind you would use to open a massive catering tin of baked beans. He climbed on top of an industrial refrigerator and aggressively cranked that little tool until he sliced a massive, jagged hole right through the structural roof. He squeezed through the sharp splinters and vanished into the night. He defeated a multi-million-dollar facility with a $2 cooking utensil. 12. Getting dirt out of a secret tunnel is an absolute logistical nightmare. During the legendary Great Escape from Stalag Luft 3, prisoners brilliantly engineered long, narrow fabric pouches and sewed them straight into the inner legs of their trousers. They would pack these hidden sacks with loose subterranean soil, stroll out into the main recreation yard, and casually pull a hidden string located inside their pockets.
For a walk, isn't it? Yeah.
The dirt would slowly trickle down their pant legs and mix with the dusty ground as they casually walked in circles. They secretly relocated tons of earth directly in front of heavily armed Nazi guards simply by taking a walk.
Yes,
They basically defeated the Third Reich by violently shaking their pants. 13. Digging holes in the mud was simply beneath Joel David Kaplan. This wealthy pioneer single-handedly inspired every absurd helicopter rescue scene in modern action movies. Stuck in a brutal Mexican prison in the 1970s, his well-funded associates acquired a chopper and painted it the exact shade of blue worn by the federal guards. The pilot casually landed the aircraft directly in the middle of the crowded recreation yard. Kaplan and his incredibly lucky cellmate sprinted aboard while the completely baffled tower guards just stood there, assuming it was a surprise visit from an important general. The aircraft was gone in under 10 seconds, permanently ruining the blood pressure of wardens worldwide. 14. Flossing is usually just something you lie to your dentist about, but for Vincenzo Curcio, it was a literal lifesaver. This ruthless Italian mob boss was locked inside a high-security prison in Turin, staring at heavy iron bars covering his tiny window. He did not have access to smuggled hacksaws or heavy industrial files. What he did have was an incredible amount of patience and a spool of standard nylon dental floss. For several exhausting weeks, he aggressively ran strands of floss back and forth across the iron bars to create intense friction. It sounds completely insane, but the string eventually sliced clean through the heavy metal. He gave his cell a deep cavity cleaning and squeezed out. 15. Walking out of a fortress known for eating people alive requires a serious observation skills. David McMillan accomplished the impossible when he successfully escaped the Bangkok Hilton, one of the most infamously brutal prisons in Thailand. He spent months studying the exhausted guards and mapping out their lazy patrol patterns. He painstakingly sawed through his iron cell bars using tiny metal blades hidden inside regular tubes of toothpaste. Once out of his cage, he assembled crude scaling ladders using random bamboo poles stolen from the prison furniture workshop. He navigated the deadly perimeter walls under the cover of darkness while wearing civilian clothing he had secretly bought. He beat a nightmare facility simply by paying attention. 16. Breaking out of the deadliest place on Earth requires a bluff so insane it actually works. Kazimierz Pikowski was trapped in Auschwitz and knew he had absolutely nothing to lose. He and 3 friends aggressively broke into a supply warehouse, stole pristine Nazi officer uniforms, loaded up on heavy weaponry, and hot-wired the camp commandant's personal luxury car. Driving up to the heavily fortified main gate, they hit a terrifying roadblock when the guard refused to lift the barrier. Dressed as a high-ranking officer, Kazimierz leaned out the window and screamed at the soldier to open the gate before he shot him in the head. The terrified guard immediately saluted and let them drive right out of hell. 17. Concrete walls and razor wire were strictly for amateurs, according to Pascal Payet. This eccentric French criminal turned his prison sentences into a personal aviation show. He organized a massive helicopter hijacking to violently pluck him directly out of the prison recreation yard. That alone is absolute madness. But after the cops finally caught him again, he just orchestrated a second helicopter extraction from a completely different facility. Just to totally disrespect the French justice system, he later organized a 3rd airborne rescue to break out 3 of his loyal buddies. At that point, the maximum security roof was basically functioning as his own private international airport terminal. They really should have started checking boarding passes at the door. 18. Knitting is usually reserved for making ugly winter scarves, but George Blake used it to commit high treason. This highly trained British double agent was locked away inside Wormwood Scrubs prison and desperately needed a way over the massive perimeter wall. His outside accomplices managed to toss a rope ladder over the bricks, but this was no hardware store purchase. Blake had spent his quiet evenings painstakingly knitting the thick rungs himself, using illegal knitting needles and nylon twine smuggled directly into his tiny cell. He crafted his own tactical getaway gear between reading books and eating bland porridge. He scaled the wall and vanished into the Soviet Union, proving that grandmothers have highly transferable espionage skills. 19. Looking moderately annoyed is apparently the ultimate camouflage. Charles Victor Thompson was sitting on death row in Texas, completely out of legal options, so he simply decided to confidently walk away. Through a series of incredibly stupid security failures, he managed to acquire a normal set of civilian clothes and a cheap, fake identification badge. On the day of a scheduled meeting, he ditched his bright jumpsuit, threw on a nice shirt, walked straight up to the heavily armed guard booth, and loudly complained about how long he had been stuck in the facility. The guard, completely oblivious to the fact he was talking to a convicted killer, apologized and buzzed the heavy steel doors open. Thompson jogged down the street and vanished because looking like a grumpy middle manager beats maximum security. 20. Acting completely brain-dead can actually save your life. Doug Hegdahl managed to secure his release from a brutal Vietnamese prisoner of war camp entirely by pretending he had rocks in his head. He purposefully behaved so incredibly stupidly that the frustrated guards officially nicknamed him the Incredibly Stupid One. He would happily wave at enemy helicopters and pretend he had absolutely no idea how to read or write. His captors genuinely believed he was useless for military propaganda and released him as a generous goodwill gesture. They had no idea he had secretly memorized the personal details of 256 fellow captives to the tune of a nursery rhyme. He weaponized sheer stupidity to save hundreds. 21. You can conquer the criminal justice system using the exact same ingredients you would put on a cheap slice of pizza. Two highly creative inmates in a New York lockup constructed a homemade weapon that
Only one way
belongs
to
in a
find
chaotic
out.
cartoon.
Keep watch.
They scavenged a hollow metal pipe and packed it tightly with scraped match heads and a massive pile of crushed red pepper flakes from the cafeteria. The second, an unsuspecting guard popped open the heavy food slot. They struck a match. The makeshift pipe bomb blasted a thick, burning cloud of weaponized spicy powder directly into the poor officer's face. While the heavily armed guard was completely blinded, screaming and sneezing uncontrollably, the prisoners casually snatched his keyring through the bars. They successfully defeated an armed guard with aggressive Italian seasoning. 22. Pulling a Scooby-Doo villain unmasking in real life is purely terrifying. Clovino da Silva attempted the absolute most unhinged escape ever recorded in Brazilian history. When his 19-year-old daughter arrived for a standard visitation, he hatched a psychotic plan to leave the building wearing her identity. He strapped on a professional-grade silicone mask of a teenage girl's face, a long black wig, and her incredibly tight pink shirt. He left his actual daughter sitting in the cell and strolled toward the main exit. The disguise was flawless, but he forgot to change his aggressive posture.
Hold it right there.
Guards immediately noticed a supposed teenage girl walking with the heavy swagger of a cartel boss. The security footage is absolute nightmare fuel. 23. Delivering the groceries turned into a massive tactical nightmare during the legendary Maze prison escape in Northern Ireland. 38 highly organized prisoners violently seized control of an entire cell block using smuggled firearms. They stripped the terrified guards and stole their official uniforms to blend in.
All right, let's stick to the plan.
When the daily food delivery box truck finally rolled through the gates, they aggressively hijacked the entire vehicle.
Move over now.
The panicked civilian driver was forced to steer the massive truck straight toward the main exit.
Straight through, move.
When the perimeter guards tried to inspect the cargo, the disguised inmates kicked the doors open and started blasting their way out. They successfully transformed a boring lunch delivery service into the largest breakout in British history. 24. Paddling a boat through a cactus patch is a terrible way to spend your weekend. The Great Papago escape is undoubtedly the most hilariously botched prison break ever attempted. 25 captured German soldiers held in an Arizona prisoner of war camp spent weeks digging a massive subterranean tunnel. Their grand master plan was to peacefully float down the local river all the way into Mexico. They even secretly constructed a collapsible canvas kayak for the journey. There was just one massive geographical oversight. The majestic river on their stolen map had been completely dry for several years. They popped out of the ground only to find themselves standing in the scorching desert sand, holding a homemade boat.
Das ist kein Fluss.
They eventually surrendered to the authorities because kayaking through tumbleweeds is physically impossible. 25. Upgrading your getaway vehicle to a literal Nazi warplane is the ultimate flex. Mikhail Devyatayev was serving as a captured Soviet pilot in an isolated concentration camp, and he knew his days were heavily numbered. He and 9 desperate friends violently overpowered an armed guard, sprinted across a highly restricted airfield, and aggressively hijacked a massive Heinkel bomber. There was just one tiny mechanical issue holding them back. Devyatayev had absolutely no idea how to fly that specific aircraft. He was frantically pressing buttons and pulling random levers while taxiing down the runway under heavy enemy machine gun fire. Against all logical odds, he lifted off and flew the stolen death machine straight back into Soviet territory. 26. Arthritis and old age did not stop Forrest Tucker from ruining a warden's weekend. At 59 years old, this career bank robber was rotting in San Quentin, a massive concrete fortress surrounded by freezing water. Instead of giving up, he quietly scavenged scrap wood, random plastic sheets, and stolen duct tape from the prison industrial workshops. He spent weeks secretly building a 14-foot kayak in the dark corners of the facility. On the night of his grand exit, he lugged this questionable garbage boat to the rocky shoreline. The absolute best detail is that he arrogantly painted the words "Rub-a-dub-dub" on the side of the hull. He paddled away from federal custody in a sticky tape canoe. 27. Treating the legal system like your own personal action movie set takes a special kind of arrogance. Albert Spaghieri was a flamboyant French bank robber attending a highly tense hearing inside a magistrate's private office. He politely asked the judge to carefully examine a specific geographical
This
map
small
pinned to the far wall. The absolute second the judge turned his back, Spaghetti simply unlatched the heavy window, vaulted out from the second floor, and crashed heavily onto the reinforced roof of a parked car below. He instantly rolled off the crushed vehicle, hopped onto the back of a waiting getaway motorcycle, and sped off into the busy streets. Witnesses claim he actually gave a triumphant fist bump as he vanished. 28. You do not need a brilliant master plan if you are completely psychotic and willing to fight gravity. Ted Bundy was an absolute monster, but his first successful escape from custody was terrifyingly primitive. He was temporarily being held in a second-floor courthouse library while acting as his own ridiculous defense attorney. He quickly realized the bored guards were barely paying attention to him. The only problem was that his ankles were tightly bound in heavy steel leg irons. Ignoring basic physics, he just threw himself out the open window anyway. He plummeted from the second story, smashed into the grass, severely sprained his ankle, and still managed to hobble away and evade the police for 6 entire days. It turns out shattered bones mean absolutely nothing when you are an absolute lunatic. 29. Sometimes you do not need expensive tactical gear to beat the system. You just need to remember your high school track and field training. In 2016, a highly athletic Mexican prisoner nicknamed Honduras stared at the massive perimeter wall and realized it was tall, but not infinitely tall. Instead of wasting months digging a filthy dirt tunnel, he acquired a ridiculously long metal pipe. Taking a deep breath, he violently sprinted across the crowded recreation yard, planted the pipe in the dirt, and literally pole vaulted himself right over the razor wire like he was competing for Olympic gold. He perfectly stuck the landing on the other side and vanished. The man deserves a gold medal in freedom. 30. Committing a felony strictly to access decent healthcare is the most painfully relatable jailbreak in modern history. A prisoner in Sweden developed a completely unbearable toothache right as the official prison dentist closed up shop for a long holiday weekend. Refusing to suffer in his cell, he easily broke out of the low-security facility, sprinted into town, and sat in the waiting room of a local private clinic. He politely paid cash for the emergency extraction, grabbed some painkillers, and then literally walked back to the police station to turn himself in. The confused officers were so incredibly baffled by his honesty that they just gave him a ride back to his cell. The man actively committed a serious crime simply to get a proper dental filling. 31. Concrete walls mean absolutely nothing to a guy who prefers sleeping in the dirt. Claude Dallas was a hardcore mountain survivalist who treated heavy prison fences like minor annoyances on a long camping trip. He was serving a massive sentence for gunning down game wardens, but he aggressively snipped his way through 2 towering chain-link security fences and vanished directly into the hostile desert wasteland. He did not bother stealing a getaway car or checking into a shady motel. He simply walked off into the brutal wilderness and happily survived off dead animals and cactus juice for nearly an entire year while the FBI desperately hunted him. He was basically a heavily armed Bigfoot. 32. While most normal moms bake you a batch of cookies when you feel sad, this lady played a real-life game of Grand Theft Auto to get her boy out of timeout. Jay Jr. Sigler realized he desperately needed a family reunion, so his sweet mother stepped up to be the ultimate getaway driver. In the middle of a sunny afternoon, she aggressively rammed a massive vehicle straight through the heavy perimeter fences of the prison, tearing down the razor wire like wet paper. Sigler and his terrified cellmate sprinted frantically across the chaotic yard, dodging a hail of guard gunfire, and dove headfirst through the car windows. Imagine the deeply uncomfortable Thanksgiving dinner conversations they had after that stunt. 33. Pulling off a discount version of a Hollywood escape requires a lot of trashy magazines. Trapped in a high-security New Jersey facility, Otis Blunt and Jose Espinosa picked their heavy cell locks using a bent piece of scrap wire. Once inside the main corridor, they aggressively clawed their way right through the cheaply manufactured cinder block wall. To hide the massive gaping hole from the guards, they slapped together a trashy cardboard collage covered entirely in magazine photos of bikini models. They crawled into the dusty ventilation shafts, leaving behind lumpy dummies made of dirty pillows under their blankets. The guards literally spent half the morning whispering sweet nothings to a pile of unwashed laundry before realizing the inmates were gone. 34. You can outsmart heavily armed sniper towers, but you cannot beat Mother Nature if you have absolutely no idea how to set up a tent. James Earl Ray managed to break out of the highly fortified Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary, only to discover that the great outdoors is incredibly annoying. He scaled the massive stone wall and vanished deep into the rugged Tennessee wilderness. The frantic FBI launched a massive multi-state manhunt, assuming he was halfway across the country. In reality, they found him shivering in the mud less than 8 miles from the prison gates. He was completely covered in painful bug bites, exhausted, and utterly defeated by a bunch of thick bushes and steep hills. He basically survived a maximum security prison just to lose a fistfight with a mosquito. 35. Facing a barrage of bullets was infinitely better than rotting in an Allied camp for over 1,000 Japanese prisoners of war. The historic Cowra breakout in Australia was less of an organized military escape and more of an absolutely terrifying human tsunami. At the sound of a blaring bugle signal, the desperate men all charged the heavy perimeter fences simultaneously. They armed themselves with stolen baseball bats, jagged kitchen knives, and sharpened sticks. They threw heavy wool blankets directly onto the razor-sharp barbed wire and aggressively climbed right over each other's bodies in massive waves. Hundreds tragically died in the chaotic crossfire, but countless others managed to scatter deep into the deadly Australian outback using sheer willpower. 36. Unleashing a convicted killer into a crowded shopping center so he can buy festive stocking stuffers completely defies every shred of human logic. Lester Eubanks was sitting on death row in Ohio for an incredibly brutal crime, but through some bureaucratic miracle, his sentence was quietly reduced. Then, the prison administration decided to reward his polite behavior by allowing him to go unsupervised Christmas shopping at a bustling local mall. While the completely oblivious guards were likely distracted by a holiday sale at Sears, Eubanks simply walked out the sliding glass doors. He didn't even run. He just vanished into the festive holiday crowd and remained entirely free for almost 50 years because someone wanted to buy presents. 37. Most normal couples go out for a slightly overpriced steak dinner to celebrate their wedding anniversary. Nadine Vaujour literally learned complex aviation mechanics to airlift her violent husband out of a maximum security cage. She spent several exhausting months secretly taking expensive private helicopter lessons strictly to orchestrate his illegal extraction. On the big day, she aggressively piloted a stolen chopper dangerously low over a heavily fortified Parisian prison, completely ignoring the screaming armed guards and sniper towers.
I repeat, a civilian.
Michel Vaujour violently fought his way through security, sprinted onto the roof, grabbed the metallic landing skids, and they majestically flew off into the sunset together. That definitely sets a dangerously high and highly illegal standard for modern romance. 38. Surrendering an entire federal facility to a carved stick that wouldn't even scare a toddler is a terrible look for law enforcement. John Dillinger managed to break out of a supposedly death-proof jail using a highly dangerous weapon he crafted during Arts and Crafts Hour. He quietly whittled a small block of scrap pine wood into the vague shape of a heavy pistol and aggressively blackened it using stolen shoe polish. In the dim, terrible lighting of the cell block, the fake gun looked just threatening enough. He aggressively waved this wooden toy in the face of a terrified guard, forced him to unlock his massive steel door, and casually stole the local sheriff's personal vehicle to drive home. 39. Treating federal airspace like you have unlimited cheat codes activated is an insane way to spend your teenage years. Colton Harris Moore, famously dubbed the Barefoot Bandit, broke out of a miserable juvenile detention center and immediately started living his life like a chaotic video game. He effortlessly managed to steal luxury cars, expensive speedboats, and eventually actual airplanes. He had zero flight experience, so he taught himself how to pilot stolen aircraft by aggressively skimming technical manuals he found in the cockpits. He illegally flew stolen private planes across multiple state lines while completely barefoot, intentionally crashing them into muddy swamps whenever he ran out of expensive aviation fuel. The kid was an absolute airborne menace. 40. Breaking into the gates of hell just to see if you can fix the management is a level of bravery that borders on insanity. Witold Pilecki is completely legendary because he is the only human being in recorded history who intentionally broke into a Nazi concentration camp. He aggressively volunteered to get arrested in Warsaw just to infiltrate Auschwitz, gather vital intelligence, and organize a massive internal resistance movement. After surviving nearly 3 agonizing years in the absolute deadliest place on Earth, he casually decided his mission was over. He violently overpowered a guard inside the camp bakery, slashed the perimeter phone lines, and confidently escaped into the freezing night carrying heavily classified stolen documents. Most people try to avoid prison, but this absolute legend broke in just to prove a point. 41. The price of actual freedom can be darker and more traumatizing than staying inside the cage. Shin Dong-hyuk's harrowing escape from an isolated North Korean labor camp is a brutal story of survival. Born completely inside the punishing barbed wire, he had absolutely no concept of a normal outside world. To finally escape the daily torture, he and his desperate friend had to somehow cross a towering, high-voltage electric security fence. Tragically, his friend attempted to crawl through first and was instantly electrocuted, his body completely pinned against the buzzing wires. In a move of sheer desperation, Shin used his dead friend's body as an insulated bridge to carefully crawl over the lethal current without getting shocked himself. 42. Treating the strict criminal justice system like a cheap roadside motel, where you can freely check out the minute you get bored, is a bold lifestyle choice. Brian Bo Larson from Denmark is notoriously terrible at staying inside a prison cell, having successfully escaped federal custody a staggering 22 different times. His ridiculous resume includes everything from aggressively sawing through heavy iron bars to awkwardly hiding inside a smelly garbage dumpster until the trash truck rolled out the gates. At this ridiculous point, the exhausted wardens should honestly just leave the front doors wide open to save the taxpayers' money on constant property repairs. The man is a walking structural hazard for any building that costs its 43. Becoming a human ice cube is a terrible reward for swimming across an entire bay. John Paul Scott is the guy who technically proved that breaking out of Alcatraz was entirely possible. But he also firmly demonstrated exactly why nobody else wanted to try it. He squeezed his greased-up body through a small window he had painstakingly sawed open and plunged directly into the dark, freezing waters. Unlike the other famous escapees who completely vanished, Scott actually swam the entire grueling distance to the Golden Gate Bridge. The water was so unbelievably cold that by the time his body hit the jagged rocks, he was massively hypothermic. Police officers easily scooped him up while he was completely unconscious. 44. Defeating a maximum security fortress with a fake bomb that was probably just trying to broadcast a daytime soap opera is peak criminal ingenuity. The notorious Mecklenburg Six were desperate death row inmates who completely conquered a high-security prison block using nothing but a cheap portable television and some crinkled tinfoil.
The signal is...
They meticulously wrapped the bulky TV in kitchen foil, taped a few random wires to the screen, and aggressively threatened the guards, claiming it was a highly unstable explosive device. Their crazed acting was so unbelievably convincing that the heavily armed security staff was completely terrified to even approach them. The inmates quickly took over the main control center, buzzed the heavy perimeter gates open, and strolled right out into the night. They paralyzed an entire tactical team with basic home appliances. 45. Before he was smoking expensive cigars and leading the free world, Winston Churchill was an incredibly impatient prisoner of war during the Boer War. He did not have access to a brilliant tactical master plan. He just had a massive ego and refused to wait around in a cage. The absolute second the armed sentries turned their backs to chat, he aggressively scaled a massive perimeter wall and plummeted directly into a civilian's vegetable garden. He then survived by hiding deep inside a filthy coal mine for several days, completely surrounded by massive rats. He finally stowed away on a moving freight train, traveling 300 miles to freedom completely covered in black soot like a chimney sweep. 46. Utilizing a massive physical handicap to beat the justice system is honestly brilliant. Edwin Boyd was a highly successful Canadian bank robber sitting in the freezing Don jail in Toronto. He and his partner realized that the partner's heavy wooden prosthetic leg was completely hollow. They creatively used the fake limb to smuggle several industrial hacksaw blades right past the oblivious guards. They spent their noisy nights aggressively sawing through the thick iron bars of their cell window. To avoid detection during daytime inspections, they literally glued the sawed metal bars back into place using chewed-up bubblegum and spit. When the timing was perfect, they kicked the sticky bars out and vanished. That leg was a tactical masterpiece. 47. Defeating more physical security in one single night than most modern video game characters do in an entire campaign made Jack Shepard a legend. This absolute celebrity escape artist of the 1700s was basically a living, breathing cheat code. The authorities were so terrified of him that they heavily chained him directly to the solid stone floor in a reinforced strong room. Armed with nothing but a single crooked iron nail he found on the ground, he successfully picked the heavy padlocks on his massive chains. He then aggressively scaled the inside of a filthy brick chimney, violently smashed his way through 6 different reinforced iron doors, and lowered himself to the muddy London streets using a dirty blanket. 48. State-funded recreational programs are a terrible idea if you are running a prison.
Nah, he's checking.
Robert Spencer and Lawrence Simpson executed the infamous art class escape entirely because the warden let them play with paints. They quietly hoarded tubes of green and blue acrylic paint and took their bright white prison uniforms back to their cells. They painstakingly painted the fabric to perfectly match the exact sterile shade of the surgical scrubs worn by the medical clinic staff.
Yeah, they're identical.
Once the paint completely dried into a stiff, crunchy mess, they threw on their toxic outfits, grabbed a couple of stolen medical clipboards, and confidently marched right past the heavily armed guards. They literally painted themselves a brand new life. 49. Escaping house arrest. Exactly like an entitled billionaire, involves entirely ignoring the rules and throwing cash at the problem. Carlos Ghosn was the incredibly wealthy CEO of Nissan, living under heavy 24-hour police surveillance in Japan. His unlimited bank account hired a highly trained team of ex-Special Forces operatives who calmly walked right into his luxury apartment. They shoved his entire body into a massive, reinforced black case designed for heavy concert audio equipment. They drilled a few tiny air holes in the bottom, casually wheeled his boxed-up body right past the absolutely oblivious airport security who forgot to use the X-ray machine, and loaded him onto a luxurious private jet.
Easy now.
He mailed himself to Lebanon via first-class freight. 50.
Yeah, I know it looks bad,
Smooth-talking a cop while you are literally covered in warehouse
inventory
dust
from the old depot down
takes nerves of absolute steel. Richard Lee McNair officially holds the undisputed title for enduring the most physically agonizing escape in modern history. Working in the prison mailroom, he aggressively constructed a tiny, hidden breathing pod buried deep inside a massive wooden pallet stacked high with heavy mailbags. He shoved a hollow tube through the canvas to breathe and buried himself entirely under the crushing weight. He sat in that claustrophobic, sweltering darkness for several miserable hours while a clueless forklift driver violently tossed him onto a hot delivery truck. When he finally sliced himself out, he effortlessly convinced a suspicious police officer he was just a local jogger. I want to know which of these escapes made you the most furious at the justice system. The fact that a guy walked out of death row because he looked mildly annoyed is a complete insult to the taxpayers. Name the biggest security failure in the comments down below. Prove you actually have a pulse by hitting that like button, and subscribe for more insane facts.